Hey y'all, today in this example, we're going to go ahead and look at a problem that goes ahead and wants us to place it, give it, depending on its problem, give it certain information. So each problem, they want us to list out the slope, vertical intercept, and horizontal intercept. So just to start off with, I want to go ahead and talk about intercepts really quick so we can understand. So we've been talking before about this, so we've been mentioning that y is equal to mx plus b. Your B is your y-intercept because it's being pushed against on the y-axis. So another way of saying y-axis is also another way of saying that would also be your vertical intercept. So we could say, instead of saying y-intercept, so one word would be y-intercept. Another word that could lead us to it is vertical intercept, because it's running on a line that is running vertical, which is true because the y is running vertical. And same goes now since we're saying that x. So if I want to say x-intercept, I go ahead and get to say horizontal. Now do not get this confused with the idea of vertical lines and horizontal lines. Yes, it is true that these are horizontal lines, but they're not working the same way as this. So the horizontal lines and vertical lines are very different than y-intercepts and x-intercepts. So our x-intercept or horizontal intercept runs here, x comma 0. It'd be some value that's running through your horizontal line, which is now your tangent at this, which is now your x at this point. And this y-intercept would be your 0 comma y. So when we look at this, so when we look at A, we get y is equal to 4x minus 5. Well, based off the formula for what we know, remember, always write it down. We can just copy the information that we have. So our M is our 4, and our B is our our vertical intercept. So when we wanted to list it, we would say slope is equal to 4, or you can write 4/1, whichever one you prefer working with, whether it's fractions or whole numbers. Next, we can worry about the y-intercept, or like I mentioned before, it's the vertical. The vertical usually comes from the y-intercept, so we can list that at -5 or 0 comma -5. Now, on this specific problem, it wanted us to list it as a coordinate point, so I'd rather list it as a coordinate point also. And most of the time you want to list it as a coordinate point, so only time we want to list it as a number is when we're working with the formula itself. Now, in order to get now your x-intercept or horizontal intercept, we have to understand what we're looking at first. So I kind of want to walk through how we can get the vertical intercept a little bit. So what ends up happening, as we know, our input now is 0. So let me go ahead and input that now. So if we input 4 times 0 minus 5, all we're going to get is y is equal to -5. So then that tells us that that turns out to be the equation of the line that we had mentioned before in the previous videos. But like I mentioned here, so that's when I punched in 0. So then the outcome becomes, okay, what happens when I punch in now? For just like how we have horizontal, vertical has 0 comma number, we're going to do the other way. So it'd be number comma 0 in order to represent a coordinate point that could be the horizontal point. So now what we will do is put a 0 as our y and look and solve for x. So I'm going to say 0 is equal to 4x minus 5. So in order to solve this, I'm going to say add 5, add 5. So now we end up with 5/4 is equal to x, meaning that our coordinate point for this one, or our horizontal coordinate point, is 5/4. So what that means is, if I come back to my graph, I would have a graph here at -5, because this would be 0 comma -5, and somewhere on this graph, if we wanted to head and look at it, if we were saying, oh, okay, this is 1, well, we want to say, oh, okay, what is 5/4? Well, we'll see here that 5/4 is just a little past that, so we'll say right around here. So it runs a line. So now I can connect the line through these 2 points. So that is the horizontal intercept. So the idea or the steps to this is, in order, depending on what you want to do, I would say first, you're already given your slope and your horizontal and your vertical intercepts. So just finding your x-intercept is usually going to be the only tricky one. And that's usually, like I was going to say, step one. Set y equal to 0. So replace y with 0 would be my correct statement for that. And then second step, solve for x. So, and another one, you'll see that to move faster, I'll go ahead and just do that in order to get the values from based off of what we're already given. So let's look at problem number B. Let's look at the second one now. So we have 2 minus 9x. So y is equal to 2 minus 9x. Now remember, I always write the formula down. We notice that it's not in the same format as our formula. It's not in the exact same format. You can still tell what information it is, but if you want to rewrite it, go ahead. So the way we would rewrite it would be like this. I'm not changing anything, I'm just moving things around. We already know the 2 is positive because there's not a negative, and then it tells us that that's minus 9, which is a representation of a negative. So from here we can say slope is equal to negative 9, or negative 9 over 1. Your y-intercept, or vertical, is going to be 0, 2, because that's what we get from our information. Now, like I said, our first thing, in order to find the x-intercept or horizontal, we'll go ahead and say 0 is equal to negative 9x plus 2. So say minus 2, divide, and then we get 2 9ths is equal to x. So the way we would write this is 2 9ths, 0. Because remember, the input, or what we solved for, is 2 9ths, but our output, what would we automatically assume, since we're saying what is it crossing, when is it crossing the x-axis? And we already know, since it's only crossing the x-axis, though, if you're on the x-axis, the value is 0. So this is the output. But this you already know. Alright, and that's pretty much going to be the gist of it. We'll go ahead and finish up the next couple of problems, and we'll move through them a little bit quicker now. So y is equal to 5x. So as you notice, as we're going down through the problems, they kind of change things around, but it's kind of the same idea. So remember, when we want to look at this first, always write the equation. Notice that this thing doesn't have a plus or minus on the backside. Well, we can always add something that's never there. So in order to add something but never change anything, you want to put plus 0. So y is equal to 5x plus 0. This means that it's not doing anything different to my problem, but we're just signifying that, oh, it could be somewhere. In this case, we're letting you know, like, hey, it's on the origin or it's in the point 0, 0, because we're not labeling that it even has a b-intercept. But the b-intercept turns out to be the coordinate point 0, 0, where they intersect the x and y's. So from here, we get the slope is equal to 5. The y-intercept is 0, 0. Now, since we already know that this doesn't have a plus or minus b, like there is no intercept, but like I said, the intercept does exist since it's crossing at the coordinate point 0, 0. So this is where it's lying, like right on the origin. It's lying right on that cross arrow. So if we know that the values of that is 0, 0, well then we know that the x-intercept is also 0, 0, because the input and the output, not necessarily that they match, but in this case, since you're putting in 0, your output should be 0, and vice versa. And we can obviously just solve for it too. So if I put it 0 is equal to 5 over x, divide by x, you're going to get 0 is equal to x, which shows the output. Y is equal to 3. So from the earlier problems, if you know what I'm talking about, if you've seen the other previous videos, we see that it tells us y is equal to 3. So then that's telling us something already. If the slope isn't shown there and it's y is equal to, well then our slope automatic assumption is equal to 0, because this is going to tell us that this is a horizontal line. Like I mentioned before, there's a difference between a vertical line, and a horizontal line, and vertical intercept and horizontal intercept. So just note the differences. So then if we do know this, but we know that the y-intercept is actually 0, 3, then we can solve for the other one. So what we could say is like 0 is equal to 0x plus 3. And then essentially we'll just solve for it. So what we'll say is negative 3 is equal to 0 over x divided by 0 divided by 0, which tells us that negative 3 over 0 is equal to x. This is not 0. That's not that. That's telling us it does not exist. So that means that our x-intercept does not exist, which actually makes sense because it never crosses the x line. So our value is somewhere here 3 and it's crossing. So we notice that it never crosses any of this line. The last one we'll be looking at is e, and I believe that was x is equal to 3. X is equal to negative 4. So from the previous videos, like we mentioned before, one last thing before, always finish strong, always write the formulas down. So then from here we know our slope does not exist. So we don't even have slope. So when we know that slope doesn't exist, we know it has to be a vertical line. So when it's running, it's going to run like this at negative 4. So that means it doesn't have its y-intercept. Its y-intercept does not exist. Its slope doesn't exist also. The only thing it does have is an x-intercept, which is located at negative 4, 0. So that's pretty much it on that. If y'all have any more questions, go ahead and message me, leave a comment, or go ahead and send it to my email. We'll go ahead and start taking a look at some other problems. Thanks a lot.